In this video, I'm going to show you how to take this extra large men's shirt and turn it into a woman's drawstring top using this as my inspiration. For this project, you'll need some extra fabric, like a sheet or some pillowcases for the casings, neck binding, and drawstrings. You can also use pre-made ribbon or cording for the drawstrings, and bias tape for the neck bindings and casings if you don't want to make them yourself. So let's get started. First, unpick the collar and the cuffs. You could cut them off, but I like to preserve the extra fabric. Next, cut off the front button plackets. Then try on the shirt. Determine the depth of the V-neck and where you want the casings to go, and mark them with a pin or fabric marker. I like to tie a piece of cord around the waist to get an idea of what the gathers will look like. Also, mark the place where you want the hem to be and add an inch for seam allowance. Before cutting the shirt, I changed out the straight pins for safety pins to mark the casing positions because the pins have a habit of falling out. To create the V-neck, start at the yoke and cut at an angle to where you marked the shirt. Fold the shirt in half front to back, because next we're going to cut strips for the casings from the bottom of the shirt starting at the hem mark. I also ironed the shirt so that the strips would be more even. The width of the casings can be from 1 1/4 to 1 1/2 inches depending on if you want smaller or wider casings. If you have trouble sewing close to the edge of a fold, you may want to make them a little wider to give yourself more playroom. If there isn't enough fabric on the shirt for the casings, you can use pillowcases, sheets, fabric, or bias tape to make the strips. The casing will be visible on the outside of the shirt, so be aware of that when choosing the extra fabric. Since I've run out of shirt fabric, I'm going to cut the strips for the drawstrings and the neck binding from a pillowcase. First, cut off the seams and fold it open. This is the perfect situation for a rotary cutter, if you have one. If not, scissors work fine, it just takes a little longer. I cut 6 strips, 1 1/4 inches, from a regular size pillowcase, but your measurements may vary, so you may want to measure your shirt to get an idea of how much material you'll need, or cut a few extra strips just in case. For the neck binding, start by sewing the sections of the binding together until they're long enough to go all the way around the collar to the hem on both sides. For reference, my neck opening was 64 inches long. Press the seams open and pin the right side of the binding to the inside of the shirt all the way around the neck opening. There are many ways to sew a neck binding, so if you have a preferred method, use that instead. Starting at the bottom of the shirt, sew the neck binding to the shirt using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Trim the ends of the binding if you had extra like I did. Trim the seam allowance so it's even all the way around the neckline. At this point I realized the seam binding was wider than I wanted, so I trimmed it by about a 1/4 inch. If I were to do this again, I'd cut the original strips for the neck binding to 1 inch wide instead. Fold up the edge of the seam binding about a 1/4 inch, iron it into place, and continue all the way around the neckline. Then fold the folded edge over the seam and iron again. Pin into place, then top stitch close to the fold on the right side of the shirt. I used a zipper foot because I wanted to get very close to the fold and I can see better with the zipper foot, but use whatever works for you. For reference, this is what the neckline looks like with a 1 inch seam binding. To create the casings for the drawstrings, I used the original shirt so the fabric would match, but you could also use bias tape if you wanted to save time. To prepare the casings, fold up one side 1/4 inch and iron into place all along the casing. Fold up the second side to meet the first and iron again. If you have a bias tape maker, you could also use that. Repeat with all the casing strips. Using a washable marker, mark the shirt with lines for where you want the tops of the casings to go. Then pin the casings to the shirt. To sew the casings to the shirt, fold the ends under 1/2 inch and trim if necessary. The upper back casing should go from one sleeve to another. Top stitch as close to the fold as possible. When you get near the end of the casing, turn the edge under and sew to the end. Then sew down the second side of the casing. The zipper foot can get close to the edge and can also be moved to sew on the left or the right side, so it's useful for this situation, but a regular foot will work too. Use the same procedure to sew all the casings to the shirt. On the waist casing, start 1 inch in from the opening so the sides of the shirt can be overlapped. The upper front casing should start near the sleeve seam and go to the neck opening, while the sleeve casings should start and end on either side of the button placket. To prep the drawstrings, fold in half and iron. Then fold one side to the center, iron again, then fold in the second side, iron again, and finally fold in half and iron again. This is a fairly time-consuming process, so you can use cord or ribbon if you don't want to make the drawstrings yourself. However, reusing things is company policy over here at the House of Re, so mine are made of pillowcases. To calculate the lengths of the drawstrings, measure a shirt that fits you loosely, then add approximately 32 inches for each full bow tie. Since the bows around the sleeves will be smaller, add 26 inches instead. Here's a chart with the lengths of the drawstrings I used as a general guideline. Once you have your own measurements, cut the drawstrings to the desired length. To sew the drawstrings, unfold the ironed edges, fold in the ends, then refold and finger press or iron. Sew along the sides of the drawstrings to sew the tucked edges in place. Sewing the ends of these drawstrings is tricky because the machine doesn't have much to grab onto, so I pull on the threads in the back to help move the fabric. Also, if I can't get the machine to back tack properly, I tie off the threads to secure them. For the two upper front drawstrings, finish on one end only, and leave both back drawstring ends unfinished since they'll be inside the casing. I've seen videos of people who make things like this without ironing, so I did a little test. I folded and sewed two ends without ironing, and the other two I ironed first. If you're highly skilled, you might not need to iron, but if you're only semi-skilled like me, ironing really helps keep your seams nice and crisp. Next, we're going to attach and thread the drawstrings through the casings. For the upper front drawstrings, make sure the drawstring is finished on one end. Using a safety pin, thread the drawstring through the casing with the raw end towards the sleeve. Sew the raw end into the casing, then sew the casing closed by creating a rectangle and back tacking to hold the drawstring in place. The finished end will be used to create the bow. Repeat on the other side. For the back drawstring, thread the drawstring through the casing and secure the ends with a pin. Sew the drawstring in place and then sew the casing closed in a rectangle shape, back tacking to secure the drawstring. And then repeat on the other side. For the sleeves and the waist, make sure the drawstring is finished on both ends. Then thread the drawstring through the casing. The ends will be used to create the bows. To create the tie closure, first make sure both ends of the drawstrings are finished, then pin one end to the neck binding where the V of the neck ends. Sew and back tack to secure into place. Then repeat on the other side. I later hand tacked the extra drawstring down to keep it in place. To make the shirt hem, fold the fabric 1/4 inch from the edge and iron it in place all the way around the shirt. Fold over again and iron again. Sew close to the folded edge all the way from one side of the opening to the other. The hemming procedure for the sleeve is pretty much the same as the shirt, but in the spirit of experimentation, I decided to do one sleeve hem without ironing and one sleeve with. The rolled hem is faster, but as you can see, it's uneven and crooked in places, especially where there are multiple layers of fabric. The ironed hem isn't perfect either, but it's better, so I'm going to continue using the iron. And that's it, we're done. The original men's shirt was made from beautiful cotton fabric, so I wanted to use it for something nice. This top requires a little extra effort to sew, but I think the result is worth it. And it's versatile. You can wear it with a pair of jeans or dress it up. Plus, it's size adjustable. So I hope this inspires you to try your own refashioning project. Thanks for watching, and happy upcycling!